Shout out to Snowball, our incredible new sponsor, a private community where top entrepreneur investors share private deal flow, wins, tough lessons, strategies, get advice, and so much more. Check out www.snowballclub.com. Let's grow together with Snowball. Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with John Seiffer. He is a business coach and author, and he's got some great ideas for us today. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm looking forward to learning from you. Thank you for your time today, John.
Oh, my pleasure.
Cool. I always kind of joke around at the beginning and said, hey, man, you were born. Then you ended up on a show about mergers and acquisitions, buying and selling companies and running them. How did you end up here? Give us your origin story.
It's been a while. The short answer is I'm totally unemployable. So I have had companies my whole life. I've never had a job. The weirdest one I had, we sold movie libraries to apartments and they used it as a marketing tool. And we basically shipped out movies every 30 days to them. So we were like Netflix before it was Netflix. But after I started that company when I lived in Texas and 2 years later wanted to move back to the Northeast where I'm from, didn't make sense to move the company. So I left. And I left the company in Texas and ran it long distance. This was in the 90s and before the internet made that easy. So they would overnight me data tapes and stuff. And I had that company for 23 years. And it's really where I learned how to coach other business owners and how to systemize a company because I wasn't there. I wasn't in the weeds to get everything done. And I talk about this idea of exiting your company without selling it. And because that's what I did. I had gotten it so systemized where I was working 10, 20 hours a month, maybe. And I looked into selling it. And what I was told was I might be able to get 3 times EBITDA for it. And I thought, well, I'm not working that much. So in 3 years, I'll have the money and the company. So that's what I did. And I've actually, go ahead.
No, I was just say that's normal for a company. There's actually tiers. A lot of people don't know this, but if you can get your EBITDA above 2 million, you start getting the attention of private equity and strategic advisors. And some industries, it's all the way up in the 5 or 10 million in EBITDA. You can start getting attention. Then you can get a 6 or 7x, and then there's another tier above that, above 10 million. You can get a 9, 10 to 12x. But yeah, there's a multiples game here that has to be played, and it's basically how much money do you produce?
Well, the other thing about those higher numbers is if you're running a company at those levels, you probably aren't involved in the day-to-day. But if you can pull yourself out of the day-to-day, even at a smaller company, you can get more for it. And the way I like to say it is, if you were to leave, the customer should not know that you left. You've got people replacing you in all the things that you did on a regular basis. And that became the work that I do with clients. After I moved away from my company, I got a call. Somebody said, you ought to look into this thing called coaching. You'd be great at it. And I said, what's that? It hadn't become a buzzword yet. And I got into it. I got some training. I loved it. Started coaching other business owners and was part of a group that founded the International Coach Federation. And so I've been coaching business owners since the late 90s. And what I help them do is systemize their companies so that they can get away from the day-to-day stuff. That allows them to do either what they want outside the company or build the company in strategic ways. And like I said, when they sell it, it's worth more.
You were saying that if they're bigger, they're probably better efficient. That's not necessarily the case. I've only been after this now for about 3.5 years, and I promise you, I've looked at well over 300 companies. And when we get into the weeds of things, very often, even at the $2-3 million EBITDA range, I don't think I've looked at maybe 4 or 5 that are bigger. At that level, the CEO is still wearing 3 or 4 hats. If you look at the org
Yeah,
chart, it's one of the things I've got to have, it. I don't ever tell the sellers I'm doing this, but I break out an org chart and I start writing down who's doing what roles, or and a lot of times they're overlap, but who's taking what functions, who's doing HR, who's doing payroll, and you'll find out that there's gaps missing, right? And you start filling out the missing gaps. I seen a company doing $3.5 million EBITDA, and the wife, like, not on the payroll, not getting paid anything, still does all the, still does payroll and some of the HR functions,
right,
right? I was like,
right.
I had to tell the guy, I was like, look, and it wasn't my deal, it was somebody else's. I was helping him do. I was like, hey, you got to tell this owner that that guy's wife isn't going to work for you for free, right? Like he works. So you have to make some adjustments here, and so I love this whole exit without selling the company. What does that look like? What's the process you would, start? How do you start tackling that? What's the initial way to identify what needs to be done?
Yeah. So when the way I look at it is, think about why a company hires somebody. They used to say that small business owners were the job creators. That's baloney. Nobody likes to hire somebody. It's the demand of the customers that's the job creators. And then we hire people because we have to produce enough. And the reason you hire people is to produce something in your company, some results. Usually, if you're using org chart thinking, you slot them into a role, give them a job title, but you don't hire somebody because there's a title that's missing a person. You hire them to produce outputs. And so that's became the beginning of my book, this book called Output Thinking, which is a way to think about your people in terms of the outputs they're producing. And you said a minute ago about the owner wearing so many hats. Well, those hats are the outputs that the company needs somebody to produce, but it doesn't have to be the owner if they can figure out how to get rid of the intuition and the expertise and disperse that throughout the company so that other people can produce those outputs for them. And then they can step out of that.
That org chart thinking is really rough on small business owners because we still kind of defaulted. I need an HR person. No, you need payroll done and you need any disputes handled,
Exactly.
right? You have two outputs you're looking for, and unfortunately, it's throughout our society and in small businesses, you get this. It's not That's not my job. Well, I'm not HR. Like, yeah, but I asked you to do payroll. So in the small business world, it's a little, especially when you're under 10, 15 employees, like you're really small, or even like this podcast. I have one assistant. I probably need another one. Sometimes we have 2, that help me run and manage the thing. I still wear the hat of the, social media person, so there's an output I need, and I keep looking like, I don't wanna hand that to the person who's doing everything else right now because that's not her forte, and I'm better at it, but, it needs to get done, so I love that output thinking. So, you would say, like, make a list of the things the company needs as outputs?
Yes, and those outputs typically fall into the same, what I call buckets, because that's a little more loose than departments or teams, but they're the same buckets in every company. They have to make something that people want to buy. That's production. They have to find those people and sell to them. That's sales. And then there's a bunch of support buckets. The money, the people, which is the hiring, the managing, and all that stuff. The money, tracking the money, paying the bills, getting the analysis. There's information, making sure that the information is available to whoever needs it. And then there's a checklist of things I call CAFE. It stands for compliance, administration, facilities, and et cetera, which are things that if you don't pay attention to them, you may be fine for a while, but then at some point they'll bite you in the butt. And then the seventh bucket is growth. It's what are the plans? What's your strategy and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you think about the outputs in those buckets, that's independent of who's doing them. When you start a company, or if you're very small, you may be doing them all. I'm mostly retired, but I don't play golf or have a boat. So I keep working with entrepreneurs. I'm not building a company at this stage in my life. I've done that. I still have to, somebody's got to clean the room. I don't hire a janitor for it, but um, but as you get bigger, you either outsource that or contract out or do it yourself. So the key, going back to your original question about how to exit, is to figure out who's filling all those buckets and then figure out how each one can be filled without you. And generally, the owners keep the strategy, the higher level stuff, and sometimes they keep a couple of finance pieces. Like they may be doing the bank reconciliation or approving some of the invoices and things, just so there's no fraud involved. Uh, but those are easily transferred when you sell, and the customers don't even know about it and care about it. So that makes
So
the company more valuable.
I get that. One of the things I look for as far as systems and processes is how well they documented. When somebody says they do payroll, it's like, okay, when you're sick or you're out, who does payroll? Right? Like, who's your backups? And without
Right.
yeah, that's what wakes up people and realize it's not documented. It happens all the time. If you don't show up for a week, that's one of my favorite questions to ask a business owner. If something happens to you, you don't show up for 3 weeks, what does not get done?
Yeah.
What just doesn't happen, right? And then I ask when I get the chance to talk to other managers or other employees, same thing. If you're gone for 3 weeks, what doesn't get done? What stacks up on your desk, right?
Yeah. And it's important to document that stuff for two reasons. One is so that you can train new people, but also so you can monitor the people who are doing it. There's a lot of things in a company you don't do every day, and maybe you do them quarterly or something. And if you forget how to do them because you're not doing it every day, you need a place to go back and look. I talk about that in the output thinking book because those outputs are best produced by systems, and those systems have to be documented. Those are typically called SOPs, standard operating procedures. And there's so many tools now that you can use to document those. There's really three kinds of SOPs that get documented. One I call the recipe, which is just like in a cookbook. Take so much of this and put it in this and have the temperature of this. Those are easily documented. It's usually done with data or a computer setup or a machine. You can document those with a video. Just have the person doing it, record what they're doing, and talk about, here's why I'm doing this, I'm moving this over here, et cetera. Those are very easy. The second kind of documentation is a dance. So when you're doing selling, you can't tell somebody exactly what to do at every step. You're dealing with people, but you can dance. And then you document it. After you have a conversation, here's what I'd like you to know to have gotten out of that conversation. And here's how you record it. Let's say if it's a sales conversation, how do you put it in the CRM? And you can very easily document the output of what that conversation should be. And then the third type is a creation. It's where you don't really know what the output's going to look like. You can't document that. There's certainly no recipe for it, but you can document the constraints. So here's two examples. One is a graphic artist. You want them to do a logo for you. Well, you say it has to be these colors. It has to be this mood. These are the file formats I want. Those are the constraints. And within that, they can create. It also happens in service companies like CPAs. A CPA will create a tax strategy for you. Now, that part is creation. It's very creative. A lawyer will create a way to attack a legal problem. The filling out the tax forms, that's a recipe. And then you can go back to how does your software do that? But you have to have those things documented so that you as the owner aren't tied down to it on a day-to-day basis.
I love that you have those 3 different ones. I'm one of these logical guys, and I haven't written programs in a long time, but I see the recipe version, and then I see the if-then version, right? This happens, do that. If this happens, do that. When this happens, do this, right? And I've written a lot of standard operating procedures in my life just because I come from a tech background running big data centers. So managing big outages and stuff like that, like we had, at 5 minutes, you call these guys. You've got 5 minutes to fix it on your own. If it goes over 5 minutes, call these guys, right? And at 15 minutes, do this. And at 25 minutes, you have to wake me up. If it's revenue impacting, you have to wake me up in 10 minutes. If then, that logical of this happens. So it's the same thing in that sales dance when you were talking about. I don't know where I would start because I'm logical, where I would start on writing a step by step how to do a sales transaction because I do a lot of sales. I do a lot of negotiations, but it's very organic.
Well, in a small company, the same person does the entire sales process. They figure out who the customer is, they do the marketing, they do the outreach, they put together the proposal, they close the deal. As companies scale, you break that system into subsystems, and each one, the output of each one becomes the input to the next. And you can document what those outputs should be
Yeah.
if you want to break them out. So you can say, look, here's how we define a qualified lead. And typically your marketing systems produce qualified leads, and then they hand those over to the salespeople who close the deals. But if the output isn't defined properly, then you'll waste a lot of your salespeople's times on leads that aren't qualified or they aren't the right thing. So that's where you start with the sales process is defining the output and then talking about it from there.
Yeah, I'm a very, I think they call it type A personality, where you just give me the high level and get out of my way, I'll get it done. And what I
Yeah.
find is when I hire and do stuff, not everybody can operate like that. Because I love what you said about defining the output. That's what I would love. I'd rather just say, here's what I'm looking for, and here's the parameters I want it, and go do it. Figure it out. Bring it to me. Right. And then I'll
Yeah.
tweak. I'll go, well, we may go back for 2 or 3 iterations, right? Like, hey, no, I need this just a little bit. That I know I didn't say that. But, then you get it right. A lot of people don't do well with that. A lot of my like, especially a lot of times when I hire, like, virtual assistants and stuff from they want logical step-by-step steps, and I was like, "I don't care how you get there, kinda here's what I'm looking for," and they kinda look at you like, "Oh my god, what do you want me to do?"
But the thing is, people who can figure that out on their own, they tend to be hard to find, and particularly if you need industry experience. And so if you can define that stuff for them, it's much easier. There's a great quote from a guy who was the chairman of the Lean Enterprise Academy. Lean manufacturing came out of the Toyota production system. And he says, brilliant process management is our strategy. We get brilliant results from average people managing brilliant processes. And we notice that our competitors often get average or worse results from brilliant people with broken processes. And the processes that he's talking about, they're the same thing as the systems and the SOPs and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's why,
You know,
once you figure out how to do something right really well, I like to document it and, like, 'cause that's one of my problems I have is I prefer personally, I don't wanna do the same thing twice ever. Tough as
you
a
and me
business owner
both.
yeah, it's tough as a business owner to actually say that out loud, I don't. I will, and I have, and I have to, but I joke around a lot and said, "I would outsource brushing my teeth so I could get somebody to show up at the right time each day, the 2 or 3 times a day I need them there." I just can't get the wife refuses,
But
and I can't the kids think it's silly, so I know,
well,
and then
see, if you get to where you can take your teeth out of your mouth, then it's easier to do that.
I'm getting close, I wear partials because of a car wreck I was in years
But
ago.
here's the thing with entrepreneurs, they tend to be very intuitive and very quick and very smart.
Mhm.
I liken it to grandma in the kitchen without a recipe. She makes great food, but
Mhm.
you can't scale a restaurant that way. You have to get those recipes out. And one of the things I tell people to do is as they're doing something, try to think of why they're doing it and what steps they're doing it. And every time they hit a place where they use judgment, that may be a different subset of a sub process. And so where you look up all these things, you write down this thing, and then you decide, well, okay, that's a judgment. Now, that may be the input to the next process. And you can outsource some of the other stuff or delegate some of the other stuff before the judgment piece.
Yeah, I like the cooking thing. I like to cook, and it's, like, done by taste most of the time, right? And then later in life, I developed I can't eat anything that has gluten in it. It makes me viciously ill for days. And, but yeah, it's really hard not to I cook by taste, so it's hard to not to just taste things as I go. I get that. It's the same way, I guess, sales I think going back to the sales thing, I think sales, like, is that a lot. There's something inside in negotiations the same way. You and I are sitting in a room and trying to solve something. When inside of negotiations, all I'm really trying to do is figure out where you're trying to get and if I can help you get there,
Yeah.
right? That makes sense to me. So, like, where's this person trying to get? What they're trying to accomplish? Does that make sense to me at all? And can I help them get there? And I don't know what the formula, other than saying it out loud like that. When somebody asks me to train them in negotiations, I just say, ask more questions.
Yeah. And so you can come up, if you thought about your process of doing that
Hmm.
for you, because you're good at it, you could come up with a list of questions for them to try.
Yeah.
And the output of that stage of the negotiation would be, oh, I know what they're trying to get. That's one piece. And that's an output. I actually know this. The next step is, how can I help them get that? Now we're into here's what I can offer, here's what we can make a deal. That's the second subsystem of that process. Now, if you're a small company, you can do that all yourself and you can do it all very intuitively. It's when you want to scale or when you want to pull yourself out of it that you need to document what those systems are and what they look like.
One of the things I wanna make sure people get is this is still all inside of buying and selling companies. If a business owner does what you're explaining here, and they prepare their company, prepare to exit their company without exiting, now they've got a marketable company to sell when they're ready to sell. Because that's what we're all looking for. Every one of us out there, all those acquisition entrepreneurs, ETA, very few of us are turnaround experts, and very few of us other than college MBAs winning their first job, it's called ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition. They're wanting to do some work. That I mean, they're straight out of college and wanna prove their merit. Most of
Yeah.
the acquisition entrepreneurs I know, we're looking for well-oiled machines we can add to our especially anybody running a holdco. We're looking for well-oiled machines to add to our portfolio that produce long-term wealth for both the employees in the company and our family interest, right?
Yeah.
Um, you don't get there without these systems and processes, without being able to exit without selling, because that's what we're
No.
doing as soon as we get in, we're trying to make sure that we exit ourselves out of, you know.
You want to do so. Every business owner I've talked to wants three things. They want more money. They want time off from the business, actually, and they want work that they love.
Mhm.
And if you can systemize the other stuff, then you can get that. If you are if you're selling your company, then the more systematic it is, the less systems that you're involved in, or the higher level of systems you're involved in, the more valuable it is. The flip side of that is if you're buying a company, you might want to look for a company that doesn't have good systems in certain areas where you know you can improve them. And as I said before about those 7 buckets that are the same in all companies, the systems within some of those buckets are almost identical. Accounts payable, accounts receivable, some parts of sales and marketing are very replicable. The product or the service that you create, that tends to be very different from company or from industry to industry in any case. So you might want to make sure that the production systems of something you're buying are in place, because the seller's going to leave and you have to have people that know what they're doing. But if you're good at putting in accounting systems or planning systems or other hiring systems, for example, then you can buy a company cheaper because it's not systemized. And then you can add those systems and add a lot of value.
Yeah, I get that, yeah. There's a lot of people out there, that's what they're looking for too, like, that's the ETA crowd, the entrepreneurship
Yeah.
through acquisition. And a lot of those guys are flipping businesses, meaning, in the ETA world, they've done what's called a search fund. So they've
Mhm.
raised money through, their college alma mater, or you call it they actually a lot of these high MBA, a lot of they originated out of the Ivies. So the
Yeah.
ETA
And sometimes they
originated.
have an investor funding them for a while and things like that.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say the search
Yeah.
fund is usually it's not self-funded, they actually have a pool of people,
Mhm.
and they've gotta get in and get out within sometimes 5 and as long as 10 years because those investors need to see a return, they need to basically have liquidity. So, that's what they're looking for, that's the exact world that they operated in, is like they need to get in, make improvements, grow, scale, maybe acquire other companies, push that number up, and then sell for more than they got it for so everybody gets a profit.
Yeah. And that's if you can buy a company where it's not very systemized and you can implement those systems, then it makes it easier to scale, grow, and get a better exit on the other end.
The risk you run buying something that's not very systemized is the guy that has the system just is very likely just left, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
all in their head, right? So that's the risk you run is like, it's okay it's okay if there's not systems and processes around stuff that people are still doing on a day-to-day process because you can extract that from current employees and hopefully they won't leave. There's usually I mean, it's not uncommon to have high turnover after a change after a
After
sell.
an acquisition. Yeah.
After an
Yeah.
acquisition. One of the main reasons it causes that, honestly, is the new acquirer gets too antsy and starts trying to change things right away. The safest thing a business owner or a business acquirer could do is literally just observe for 60, 90 to 180 days. Just
Yeah.
go
If
in.
it's working, you know,
Yeah, it's
um,
working, yeah.
and during the due diligence, one thing you can do is ask the seller, tell me how a sale gets made,
Mhm.
all the way from somebody who's never heard of this company, but is our target market. How do they find out about us? What do they do? What do we do? And if that all sounds like it depends on individual relationships and those relationships are with the seller, they're going to leave. So you have to figure out another way. If, on the other hand, they're done by systematic things that can be measurable and trained, et cetera, now you've got a systematic company.
What's your preferred method to go through all this? You have them document in Word docs, you have them shoot a bunch of videos. What's your preferred or is it a combination of all of it, or
Yes. When I first did this for my company, Word Docs was all there was. And the platform that you put it on has to be easy to search. I think you should keep it all in one place because If you start breaking it up, oh, the finance stuff goes over here and the production stuff goes over here. There's a lot of systems that overlap and somebody won't know where to find it. Just put it in one thing that they can search. Notion is currently a good one. So as we're talking in early 2024, but those platforms come and go. It just needs to be searchable, easy to edit, etc. But video is very important and very simple to make. It doesn't have to be high production quality by any means. If you're doing something on a screen, there's screen recording videos. If you're doing something in something physical, you can do it with your phone. And then now there are softwares that can take those things and transcribe the documentation from them. So now you have a searchable document and you also have the videos that show you visually. So I'd say do it that way. Have the person who does the work record it and then have somebody else try to follow what they did. And usually the first time they do it, there's pieces missing. So you have somebody go through that's not familiar with it. They fix it up, and usually that's good enough. Then you just put it where somebody can find it.
Hey there, How to Exit family. Today, I'm thrilled to talk about Snowball, our incredible new sponsor. This community is more than just an investment hub. It's a place where growth is holistic, a private community where top entrepreneur investors share private deal flow, wins, tough lessons, strategies, get advice, and so much more. Snowball is a network rich with like-minded, experienced entrepreneurial minds, including investors, founders, CEOs, and doers, all dedicated to meaningful growth. Snowball threads are like a daily masterclass. This isn't just about financial success. It's about enriching your entire life. If you're looking for a community that supports your entire entrepreneurial journey with shared wisdom and collective support, check out www.snowballclub.com. I believe their approach to compounded growth in wealth, health, network, and relationships could be the game changer you've been seeking. Let's grow together with Snowball. Yeah, I do that all the time with Loom. I use Loom as a tool that sets on my
Yeah, Loom is one of
Mac.
the good ones.
Yeah. And for the virtual assistants and stuff that are overseas, I'll when I need them to do something, I'll just pull it up. I'll do it once, shoot a 4 or 5 minute video and send it over. It's like, here's what I need you to do. And it's way easier than writing it or even like pulling them up on a Zoom call and trying to explain it to them. Like
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's just easier to say, okay, here's how I did what I just did. I want you to repeat this. And yeah, I don't care if you do it exactly this way, but here's how I got it done. So they can see it done once. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I just had a client who's looking to acquire companies in a certain niche,
Mhm.
industry niche. And he could find about 50 companies, but he didn't have their phone numbers or anything. So he figured out how he would go about doing the research. He recorded that, found somebody on, I think it was Upwork or Fiverr, one of those, and he
Right.
came back and now he's got 250 companies with phone numbers and the owner's name, and he didn't have to do it.
Yeah, I do that a lot too. I bring a lot of part-time work and like, hey, especially like I said, I don't like doing anything repetitive. If there's something I need to do and it's repetitive, I'll record it or something or bring it in. When I had my real estate investment firm, we had interns all the time, people that wanted to learn real estate investing.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you get to learn their first part first. This is data correlation. So I need to pull all, lists from this source, and this source, and then you got to mix them all together. And I would just show them one time in person. I'd have them sit over my shoulder. But same thing, all these remote now. It'd be easier if I'd have just shot a video because they would come back and ask questions. And if I had shot the video, it'd just like
You could
watch
say,
the video.
watch the video again. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that's sometimes a hard thing for business owners because they're used to getting all the questions and they complain about, I'm always getting interrupted and stuff. Well, just record the video and tell people not to ask you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, now I got to be the hard guy, the tough guy. And that's sometimes harder to do. But once you break that cycle, it's terrific.
That there's some self-discovery I did when I was running companies. One of the things I learned was I like I love solving problems. I think there's only, and I've said this many times on the show, I think there's probably only 2 or 3% of the population that are really good at solving problems. They're natural born problem solvers. Yeah, these guys are like me that we play puzzles for fun. Like right now, I'm hooked on this game where it's a crossword puzzle without any hits, just a bunch of scrambled letters. Only 2 or 3% of the population is like that. But I honestly think that what happened for me anyway, what I found is a lot of the companies I created, I love solving the problems. We'd have very complex companies, and then when I would solve a problem, my guys could go and do that task because I've shown them how to do it. But as soon as something changed, they come back to me and go, "Hey, that's not how I tied the shoe last time. This is different. Can you show me how to tie the shoe?" And it was like, it got really frustrating because it doesn't scale, right?
Yeah.
And it was
The people that
self-imposed.
you're talking about, that 1 to 2%, they tend to think like engineers. And this is one of the things that I mentioned in the output thinking book is that every system that produces outputs has 4 parts. There's a trigger, something that starts it. There's the input, which is the stuff you work on. There's the transformation, which is how you take the input and turn it into the 4th part, which is the output. And if you can separate those pieces, the documentation we were talking about is usually in the transformation stage. This is how you do it. But if you know what the trigger is and you know what the input is, that's your prep for knowing even if you can start to do it. Sometimes the trigger is a day, like payroll is a system that's gets triggered by every other Thursday or whatever it is in your company. Others are triggered by an event. So a customer places an order. Well, that triggers a whole fulfillment system. Or sometimes it's a condition. Inventory has reached a certain level and that triggers a reorder system. So that's the first part. Then there's the input. What do you need to work on? How do you transform it? And what's the output?
Yeah. The one of the things I like to play with these days, and it's only been the last 18 months or so, maybe 2 years by now, is AI. Have you messed with any of the AI tools yet?
I played with them a little bit. My son and I were having it make different songs in the style of different rappers and things like that. But it
I
hallucinates too much for me right now to
It's
trust it.
getting better. It's getting
Getting
way
better. It
better,
is
right?
getting better.
In the beginning, I thought it was doing really well, and then I realized one day I was pressed for time, and one of my guests hadn't, filled out the bio, so they just basically I knew I had it was on my calendar, but I had nothing to go off, so I had nothing to research. So I Googled them, I realized they had written a book, so I reached into inside of back then it was ChatGPT was the main one, so I reached into ChatGPT and I said, "Tell me everything about this person and the book they wrote," right? And it gave me a bunch of stuff, and luckily, we did that little chat like you and I did before the hand. I said, "Hey, you didn't submit your notes," so I kinda used ChatGPT, he goes, "You did what?" And it's like, "Yeah." He goes, "No, it's all wrong about me." There's another guy in Australia that wrote a similar book, right? And it's totally wrong. I didn't, like, say like, it had all these case studies, like, "Yeah, he did this case study and this that study," and I was ready, and it was totally wrong. It was Adam Coffey, by the way, he's been on the show a
Yeah.
couple times, he's a private equity guy. But it was totally wrong about him, so I basically had the very first interview, I just we spent 4 or 5 minutes, "Okay, give me some bullet points or something," and, so I can knew what to ask you.
If you can check it like you just did,
Yeah,
then it can put the stuff in a really good format usually.
it's
Uh,
pretty good now, it still hallucinates some, and you just have to double check.
yeah.
It's like asking my 13-year-old how to do something, if he doesn't know, he might make it up. You
Yeah.
gotta really watch it, but it's really good at, you know right now you can train it, so I fed it a bunch of mergers and acquisitions PDFs that I have collected over time, and I
Mhm.
used my own I built I don't know what you call it, a chat bot or whatever you call it. It's, they have a name for it, but I forgot what it's called, but I built a little bot or something inside of this thing. Now I use that, and it references that as its education, and it's pretty accurate. The cool thing is, I like to give it like your standard operating procedures. I like to say, "Okay," and you can upload full files now. Say, I can upload a full standard operating procedure, or in our case, like the transcript for this and for these shows, and say, "What are the key takeaways?" And it's
Yeah.
really good at
Yeah.
picking.
If you can have it only work on your own data that you know is clean,
Yeah,
then it's much better than if you
yeah.
just send it out there to the wild internet.
So I'm curious on I haven't tried it yet, but I maybe even still have some old standard operating procedures. I think that would be a fun play inside of AI is like, here's a SOP, here's a standard operating procedure. How can I improve upon it? Just feed it to AI and say, what would you do differently? What would be improvements upon this?
Or you
And
could ask it for the 4 parts. What's the trigger? What's the inputs that's required? What's the transformation look like? And what's the output?
that's another thing about AI. The more structure you give it what you're looking for, like you just did, the better
Yeah.
the output. The better the
Yeah.
input, the better the output every single time. And even if you tell it you gotta role play with it a little bit. You gotta tell it what its position is. Like you're a systems engineer specialized in this, this, and this. And if you tell it what its role is, it gets rid of a lot of the ancillary data from anything else
Mm.
it kind of focuses in on that, right? It's incredible the like I said, the better the input, the better the output. But I would like to see the standard operating procedures and stuff like that. What was it before and after? Could it really make improvements upon you've been in business for, let's just be nice, so 25, 30 years? I've been in
Yeah,
business for, say, 20 years or more. I'm being overly nice here.
you are
For at
indeed.
least on my behalf. I'm intrigued with where this is all going. If I did something and find an operating procedure that I've done after 15 years of experience or something old one and put it in there, can AI that's been around for 2 years improve upon something that somebody's has done for 15 years?
That would
Like,
be an interesting experiment. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So where do we go with this as a business? Not just AI, but as businesses are kind of moving forward, what do you see in the next few years as far as the processes that you put people through? Is this going to change? Like the technology that's out there, is it going to really change what you do, or as a coach, or
Well, the technology changes, but the ultimate reasons for using the technology don't. Peter Drucker said back in the 70s that the purpose of a business is to create a customer. And a customer, somebody that pays you for something they value. That's never going to change. How you find those customers changes, how you produce that value changes, the costs associated with all those functions, that definitely changes. I'm terrible at predicting the future. They say, prediction is really hard, especially about the future. And so, but I do know technology is going to change. Sometimes it's better. Sometimes it's a little bit worse for a while till you get used to it. Sometimes it makes you work the way it wants to, and you have to decide if that's worth the trade-off. But yeah, it's always improving. Like I said, my first documentation for my company was I just put something in a big Word file. And, now there wasn't any cloud, there wasn't any way to break things up, and there wasn't any way to put videos easily into it. That's all changed now. But the basic process, you're trying to make something somebody wants to buy, find those people and sell to them. That's going to be the same.
yeah? What is a common? I'm just looking at the my notes with you here. What are some of the common things that when you first work with somebody? What are some of the common things that you see most business owners doing that are kind of what's the low hanging fruit, I guess is the word I'm looking for. The fastest areas they can make improvement. What's the low hanging fruit that most business owners can tackle to make improvements?
Well, the biggest one is that they're too much is depending on them because they are intuitive and quick and they don't feel like they can trust somebody else to do it. Like email is a big one. And the reason email seems to be a problem is because people think of it as one thing. Oh, I got 100 emails. But if you break those 100 emails out, there are probably 6 or 8, maybe 10 different categories of emails. Well, now we can separate those. Okay, all the ones that fall into this category have a certain output, and I respond to them in a certain way within a certain time frame. Now we can train somebody else how to do that. And maybe out of those 6 or 8 categories, there's only one that you have to handle, but you can train somebody else to do it if you think about it as subsystems and sub outputs. So that's really where we start. And then I look at those 7 buckets and say, which of these buckets is causing you the biggest problem? Which is causing you the most headache? Do you have the capacity to grow in each of these? And you got to make sure that they're balanced, because if you grow your capacity to sell, but not your capacity to produce, then you're selling stuff you can't make. Or the other, you don't want to make something you can't sell. So it's keeping those things in balance. So that's where I look, is which are the outputs that are depending on you, which are the ones that are working well for somebody else or not well for somebody else. And that's where we go.
It's interesting because I'm a natural born empath. I walk into a room, I can feel the energy in it, and I hate even using that word because they butchered it in the last 4 or 5 years and made it more touchy and feely than it really is.
Yeah.
But I think my first inclination to ask a business owner is like, "What part of your job?" I think I would, if I were sitting in your shoes, I think the first thing I say is, "What do you love doing and what do you hate doing?" Right?
Yeah. Well,
What
they
you
always tell me what they hate doing because that's why they hire me. So that's easy.
already know that. Okay, kinda. That's I was wondering, like, that has to come
Yeah.
up because a lot of people call you because, like, look, I'm burning out here. I just want to do sales and I want all this other stuff to go away. And I get that. Like I said, I've talked to a couple hundred, probably 200, 300 more or more business owners. And you ask them why you're selling. Like, oh, it's either they're retiring. A lot of times there's a like a life issue, divorce, cancer, medical something,
Yeah.
something drastic's happening, or they're totally burned out, or I guess there's a fourth or fifth one. I think I'd name four, but there's another one. And that's, I got this other idea. It's already taken off. It's making more money. I got to go focus on it. They try
And
to
then
side.
and they want the time. They want time away from that business. So then the question is, is the best way to get that time and obviously the money you need for your new idea, is it to sell or is it to exit without selling? And you may have to build your company a little bigger to afford to exit without selling, but then it can be much more lucrative in some cases.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
actually working on a project right now where I want to help business owners. It's a larger project. I've got marketing going on as we speak. Larger project, probably between the 10 to $50 million acquisition, and as far as valuation and acquisition price, has to have real estate involved because it's part of how I'm funding the whole thing, using that as collateral as an asset.
Mhm.
But the end goal is to be at, help the owner do something they may not have the time, energy, or knowledge on how to do, and that's to have it running on its own and have the employees own a piece of it. So I'm contractually going to obligate myself to turn it into an ESOP, an
Yeah.
employee operated company within a set time frame based on where the employees currently are. So that might be 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, or 5 years down the road. Personally, for financial reasons, I kinda want it to be 5 years down the road because there's these huge tax advantages to holding some of these companies. You can walk away without, if you know what you're doing, you can walk away without any capital gains, if you hold for
If
5
you
years
keep
and
it
1
for
day.
5
5
years,
years and
yeah,
1 day, yeah. So,
yeah,
that said.
yeah. Well, the ESOP is a great thing. I live in Pittsburgh, and I was
Mhm,
actually on a citywide task force for, employee-owned businesses,
mm,
and we're still going on. We're trying to promote how this is done and how easy it is, because when you actually do an ESOP, what people often don't know, first of all, you don't have to sell your entire company. You can sell a
right,
portion of it. And secondly, the portion that you sell, that portion of profits is not taxed. And
exactly.
so the way it works is you get a loan to pay the owner off, and then the tax savings pays back the loan. So it's a really interesting process. And it's all kinds of statistics that when the employees become an owner, they get more efficient, they get more productive, they get more profitable, et cetera.
There's a process though that I don't think, and this is just his personal opinion, and a lot of business owners think the same way because I've talked to a bunch of them. Not every employee's ready to have that ownership mindset. There's a little bit of training. They need to work with the guy.
There is some training, yeah,
Yeah,
but usually when they realize, oh, they've got a retirement plan now, that's
mhm,
part of that, they're willing to do that training and they're willing
right.
to step up.
Have you read the book, The Great Game of Business, or worked with those guys at
Yeah,
all?
yeah,
I'm
Jack Stack.
absolutely fan of those guys, and, that's who I'm gonna use in this project. It's like, "Look, I'm gonna acquire the business, I'm gonna bring those," because they have a coaching program where they coach
Oh,
the
do they?
executive. Yeah,
Oh,
they'll bring
cool.
in the executives. It's not expensive, it's not cheap. I think it's in the tens of thousands for a group of 4 or 5, like, to send the executive team through it, but
Mhm.
the model of teaching them the basics of the financials, the basics of how their job impacts the financials, and getting them to take ownership, I think is a key cornerstone to becoming an ESOP, to becoming an employee own and run company.
Yeah,
They've done 60 plus acquisitions. So the guys that wrote the book,
yeah.
they've acquired so many companies of their own, and a lot of them are turnarounds.
Well, they had to, because as they grew their employees, they needed a career path for them, and so they had to buy other companies for them. But there's 2 stories I love from that book about the what you were talking about, the financial education. One is, I think it was the truck drivers at one point figured out, if we can do in 59 minutes what it used to take us an hour, here's how much we'll save and here's how much value we'll add to the company and to our retirement, et cetera. That's one story, but just from that education. The other story is, there was a part that they were trying to reproduce, and their goal was to always be the lowest cost, not the lowest price sell, but the lowest cost provider. And he gave it to a team of people and said, can you take this apart and figure out how we can make it, buy it cheaper or fix it cheaper or make it cheaper, whatever it was. And it turned out they got so good at it that they were able to sell it at a lower price point to a whole new market that they could never sell to before, because
Yeah,
they had that mindset. Yeah.
it's brilliant what you can do in a collective process. I don't think in the business world, if you can get everybody bought into and have ownership into an idea, there's very few problems that can't be solved with 6 to 8 really intelligent people in the room, if they're
Yeah.
duly motivated. And a lot of times duly motivated isn't, "You're getting $25 an hour to sit in this room and solve this problem." That's not duly motivated. But, hey, you're an owner of this company, you get there's there's a profit sharing program. Even if you're not an ESOP, you get to share in the reward of solving the problem. Now
Yeah.
they've got some skin in the game, and
Yep.
if you can keep it organized and moving forward. Sometimes I've worked for the government for a while. Sometimes the meetings are a little bit of chaos, but if you can keep it organized and moving forward, it's impressive what employees will solve.
And
I
that motivation, money is obviously a part of it,
Mhm,
but it's not everything. There's a great book by Dan Pink called Drive about motivating people. And he said the three things that motivate most people are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So, autonomy is giving them the license to figure out how to do stuff on their own. And if
mhm.
you know the outputs that you're expecting, that can be the bounds within that. As long as you produce this output, hey, go for it however you want. That gives them autonomy.
Yeah.
And then mastery is getting better at your craft. And purpose is a reason that's bigger than yourself. And usually not every company is like, we're going to solve all these big world problems, but our purpose is always to help customers. And that's bigger than us.
So I wanna
So
run some you're a business coach, I'm a business owner. I've managed most of my businesses by just very few short questions, and anybody that's worked for me over a long period of time knows exactly what I'm about to say. But I'm gonna run these questions by you, and then I'm gonna say, "Hey, what would you do to improve it?" Because I'm always looking to improve. So, at the end of every business meeting or at the end of the agenda for almost every meeting that we have in any of my businesses are we always start with wins. So what are we doing well? What can we do better? Right? Where can we improve upon this, either this topic or this problem or whatever, but what can we do better? Yeah. And what are we totally missing? Right. And then about once a quarter or every so often, like we have one that the fourth question comes in is like, what are we doing that we probably shouldn't be doing anymore? Right.
yeah,
Yeah, there's always something you're doing like, okay, this isn't working. We're still doing it, but why are we doing it? But I've simplified my entire management process to that. What are we doing really well? What's working for us? Cool, let's do more of that. What can we improve upon? A lot of times, what are we missing is like our competitors doing this and we don't have it, or we're missing, hey, this feature is missing from our product, but what's missing, right? And then, like I said, once a quarter, I always like to go, what are we doing that we probably should just, what's a waste of our time, right?
yeah. I love those. I particularly like the first and the last question
Mm.
because the we often forget about wins. As CEOs, we're so into looking for problems and solving problems, and we often forget to celebrate what are we doing well. And not everybody in our company thinks like us, and so they want to be celebrated and they want to know that. And then the last one about what should we stop doing? It's real easy to just get into a routine of doing stuff because we've always done it. And I think it was Shopify or one of those companies where they said, okay, we're canceling every repetitive meeting. Every meeting that you have on the agenda that's more than once, done, done. Don't do it anymore. And then build back the ones that you need to do. But yeah, a lot of stuff like that happens.
I love Elon Musk. In his business, if you show up to a meeting and you feel that you're not contributing, you're supposed to get up and walk out. Like, if you
Yeah.
don't know why you're in there and you don't have a contribution to make to the meeting, he expects you to get up and leave the meeting. You're wasting his money and his time, right?
It
And your
was,
time.
I think it was a guy named Sempler that started doing that in South America. Yeah, I mean, if you can't keep, if people aren't in the right meetings, meetings can be a superpower when they're done right and they're hell when they're done wrong. And usually people don't put the time and effort into doing them right.
I don't want to step over. You said that, people like to be celebrated. I'm a marketing guy by previous trade, my master's degree, my MBA is in marketing. One of the main reasons I ask, what are we doing well? Because I need to promote that more. Right?
Yeah.
Right, so in my mind, what are we doing well is also not only, like, giving them a little bit of celebration, but a lot of times you're doing stuff well, you don't realize you're doing really well, and that needs to filter into the marketing, it needs to filter into telling customers, reminding customers we're best in class at, and sometimes you don't realize I'm 5'10" and way overweight right now. In my mind, when I close my eyes, I still look like, my 180 something weight fighting weight. Over time, over 52 years of my life, it wasn't sudden. Same way inside of business, things change gradually and you may not see it, and that includes the wins. Sometimes you just get really good over time and you're so acclimated to trying to fix the little problems on the day-to-day of it, you don't realize you just became the world's best at that. So the what are we doing well is a self-realization of what are we doing that's way better than most of the people out there? What are we doing that we should be telling people, or what should
Yeah.
we be screaming from the rooftops that'll attract more people to us?
And a
Um,
lot of those wins are internal, obviously, with
yeah.
what you're doing. But it's a great exercise to call up customers and say, what do you like about us? How is your life different because you started using our products or our services? Tell me about that. And that feeds into the marketing piece because now you have stories you can tell and things like that.
I do the exact same 4 questions with him. Every customer,
Yeah.
right? "What are we doing really well? What do you like about us? What can we do better? What do you need that we're not doing?" Right? "How can we improve it?" And then the other one, "Is there anything that's related to what we're doing? Do you have to buy extra parts? Do you actually have to do something on top of what we do? What are we missing?" Like, if you had X, Y, and Z, you wouldn't have to use a second vendor, you could just use us. Like, and I still and even on a customer, every once in a while, I go, "Is there anything we're doing right now we should probably just stop? It bugs the snot out of you." I don't know if I've oversimplified life in that realm, but it seems to be
Well, if
working.
you can take that's a very I like the simplicity of it. If people can then take that and turn it into something they will change their behavior and produce different
Yeah.
outputs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. All it does is elicit responses. It's your action against those responses that make improvements, right? You can have the same conversation over again. I'm very keen to. We go through a whole quarter, and we've met every 2 weeks or so, and the things we need to improve upon have been the same. Those are documented. And I start looking at that and going, "Why have we been saying that this needs to be improved upon for 14 weeks straight? There's a problem here, right?
Yeah.
Who's working on this?" It's kind of one of those. It's like, I guess that's kind of my standard operating procedure, I guess you would say. It's one of my systems is, you know,
Yeah.
I manage to do things for companies that are 1,800 miles away, 2,000 miles away, and they know that people prepare. Like, if they know they're gonna have a call with me that day, they have the answer to those 4 questions. They know
That's
99% chance I'm gonna ask the first 3. What are we doing well? What can we improve upon? What are we missing? And occasionally, I'm gonna slip in, "What are you doing that you probably shouldn't be? What are you doing that's wasting time?" Right?
yeah.
Or money or energy.
Very cool.
A lot of people times things people are doing stuff that's not wasting time or money, but it's wasting energy. They're doing stuff that's not making a positive impact on the company, and they think it's
Mhm.
supposed to get done.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's stuff it could be as stuff as little as, "Look, yeah, the attorney charges $250 an hour, but why are you doing contract reviews? Send it to the attorney. That frustrates you, you're not qualified to do it, right?
Right.
Just
And the attorney can do it in an hour and it takes you 6.
6
You know?
hours, because you hate doing it, you dread it. You spend 4 hours worried about doing it. You do 6 hours doing it when you just cost me $400 and it's gonna cost him 100 $250 because he's gonna look at it in an hour and go, "Nothing in the law's changed, nothing's changed. I don't need to do with anything with this." Right?
Yeah.
You're spending, $1,000 trying to save 250, and it happens in not just law and just, even in, like, the sales process. You're the CEO. If you got a VP of sales that's been doing sales better than you, he closed more business than you. Why are you stressed out about the sales process? Well, just tell him to take care of that, right? Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Well, there's a thing I mentioned in the Outward Thinking book, which is called Everybody Plays at the Top of Their Game. Don't do stuff that somebody else is qualified to do, and you do the things that only you are qualified to do.
yeah, sometimes that's tougher than it's
Everything's easier said than done. Otherwise,
as easy.
everybody would be doing it.
Yeah, some of that's ego, some of it's just frustration, like, "I just need this done, I'll do it myself," right? I tend to have the mentality to lead follower, get the hell out of my way. That said, well, how do people get that book? What's the best way for them to get a copy of it?
It's called Output Thinking. They can find it on Amazon under Output Thinking, or they can go to outputthinking.com, see a table of contents and some other things about the book. And there's, of course, a link to buy it there.
If
It's
somebody wants
paperback and Kindle.
Yeah, if somebody wants to get ready to exit without exiting and they want to make their company more valuable because it's well run, how do they reach out to you? What's the best way you want somebody to initialize a contact with you?
My website is ceobootcamp.com. They can email John at ceobootcamp.com. I post on Twitter a lot under the handle at Better CEO, and they can find me there. And then on my website, there's a link to getting a free coaching call if somebody wants to know if coaching is for them. And if I have time to work with them, we'll do that first.
And before we go too far, what's your ideal customer? What's the size of the company? You got a sweet spot you love to work with or industries you love to work with?
Not so much industries. I've worked in all kinds of industries, but the sweet spot is between 10 and 100 employees, somebody who's frustrated. Either they have a problem that they can't figure out how to solve, or they see potential in their company that they can't figure out how to realize. And usually it's because they're very intuitive, they're very quick, they're not systematic, and we put those systems in place and the problem goes away.
Well, awesome. Well, John, thank you for being here today. Yeah, I learned a lot. We had fun. I'm going to look through some of the system operating procedures I have for some of my guys and make sure they're up to date. And kind of, I'll listen to the show again. That's one of the reasons I do this. I love meeting guys like you that have got this figured out, taking the knowledge I get from it and seeing how I can improve upon things I'm doing. So thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge.
Thanks for having me.
We'll call that a show. Hang out for just a second. I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between 5 million and 30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT-enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.